cannibalism is actually really common just throughout our own species, right? Pretty much every culture has some form of cannibalism.
Before I introduce this week's guest, I just want to start by saying that this episode and this conversation is low-key my new gold standard for how I want guests to be and how my conversations go. This was a ton of fun. We discussed everything from archaeology, conspiracy theories, Atlantis, cannibalism, and of course, we did Bigfoot and paranormal. This week's guest is a doctoral candidate up in Manitoba, Canada, at the university there in Winnipeg. He's doing his doctoral thesis on Neanderthal teeth. So I'd just like to offer a big welcome to Mr. Josh Lindal from Canada. And thank you again, Josh, for this amazing conversation. This was, like I said, this was amazing. I'm very enthusiastic about it. I've been raving about it all week. I was going to put it out in a couple of weeks, you know how I kind of backfill episode, but this one has to come out. It's that good. This is, of course, the Caffeinated Cryptid podcast, and I am your host, Bobby Dizzle. I invite everyone to subscribe on YouTube, and all ways to listen, watch, and subscribe and follow me are in the description, especially on the audio apps, iTunes, and Spotify. Lastly, I want to also invite everyone to join my Facebook group. It's in the description. It's called Bigfoot and Coffee, the official podcast of the Caffeinated Cryptid, the official group of the Caffeinated Cryptid podcast. Bigfoot and Coffee is the name, but it's in the description. It just says join the Facebook group. It's got a star beside it. So without further ado, let's get to Mr. Josh Lindal and let's talk some anthropology. Let's talk some archaeology, archaeological conspiracy theories, and just great conversation.
I'm a PhD candidate, so I'm in the 5th year of my PhD, and I've been taking my time with my grad school. So I've been teaching at the University of Winnipeg for about 10 years already. Oh, wow. Working pretty slowly at the PhD, as a lot of people do, but the later stages of grad school, getting pretty burned out.
Mm-hmm. Chipping away at it. What is what is the Tommy Boy thing? Lots of people go to school for 10 years. Yeah, they're called doctors.
Yeah.
But you will be a doctor, so it doesn't matter.
Eventually, I hope so.
But you're doing your doctoral thesis on Neanderthal teeth.
Yeah, Neanderthals and modern humans and chimpanzees and gorillas, sort of like comparing the, you usually have a few comparative samples to like, you understand something by comparing it to something it's closely related to, right?
That's that whole, I was on a panel last night with something less scientific, but just as interesting, talking about the DNA samples you get from possible Bigfoot hair samples. Mm-hmm. How they always come back unknown because there's nothing to bounce it off of. And that was part of the whole problem.
I don't know if you know something that I don't, but from everyone that I've really looked into, they all come back known as not Bigfoot or not.
Sometimes it's a bear
related. Yeah, I mean it's a lot of things. They come back of, human, bear, raccoon, cat, dog, horse, pretty much every animal you can think of, except unknown primate most of the time.
There's been a couple that I've heard about. There's a little fella over in England, and he's 14 years old, runs around and experiments like, I'm talking, he's going to be a genius. He's probably a genius already. But they do the eDNA. You know what that is? Where you take the particles from the air or the water or the soil. And he got...
we do that at our sites in Europe where we excavate, yeah.
He got eDNA sample from a footprint that was unknown old world monkey. I'm like, how is that not a bigger deal than you're making that to be?
Well, I mean, unknown doesn't mean that it's something that is unknown. It means that it's an old world monkey that we can't identify more specifically. Yeah. So, I mean, a human is an old world monkey genetically. So it's environmental DNA is just degraded a lot, right? So it's hard to get a perfect match. So, I mean, if you're getting unknown old world monkey out of, where'd you say it was, in Europe?
Yeah, it's in the UK.
Yeah. So, I mean, that just means it's human DNA. I mean, that's all that really means.
There's a couple people over there, I hear, in the UK. A couple of actual humans. See, I brought that up last night, and the person said that exact answer. He goes, "No, a human is an old world monkey." I'm like,
yeah.
It's like I thought he had something there, because I was like, I didn't really think. I mean, you don't register it. I mean, obviously, I know that we're considered a primate, but when you hear the word old world monkey, you think, what is that? Orang pendek? Is it something we don't hear about? But he's having his own conference over there based off of that. So somebody's buying into it.
Yeah, I was thinking about like stuff that I could really contribute because I mean, I'm just a anthropologist that is interested in Bigfoot, but I don't have like I've never had a sighting or any experience. So I've been listening to a few episodes, and it seems like most of your guests sort of have had an experience. And I can't offer you any cool stories or anything like that, but like I can sort of talk about the science side. From my experience talking to Bigfoot people online, a lot of people like want scientists to be more involved, and so I like to try and fill that space. But the sort of like taxonomy and nomenclature and stuff is something that I think I could actually contribute that might be interesting for people who are interested in Bigfoot. So like the old world monkey thing got me thinking about that. Because I teach this to my like first year students, which I'm teaching a course right now. You've got like two types of monkeys, right? Old world monkey and new world monkey, and that just means like the new world monkeys are South America and old world monkeys are Africa and Asia. And then you've got the apes. You got the apes in there as well. You got old world monkeys, new world monkeys, and apes. And so you have the term monkey that you'd think the old world monkeys and new world monkeys form a group together, but actually old world monkeys are more closely related to apes than they are to new world monkeys, which means that like, what's an old world monkey? Like a baboon, right? Is more closely related to a human than it is to like a capuchin monkey or a squirrel monkey or something that comes from South America. And so there's lots of little ways like that biology and evolution, like evolutionary, like phylogenetics and stuff, is somewhat less intuitive to people who haven't studied it than they might think it is.
Yeah, I guess I never really realized that's what the old world monkey meant. Sorry, my daughter came in here wanting her headphones. She wanted me to charge. I guess we're not doing a podcast in here. But you said you don't have anything to contribute. You have a lot to contribute because you're cleansing my palate. And I need it, and I'm glad you are saying what you're saying, so it's appreciated. Don't think that you're not going unappreciated because you don't have a Bigfoot sighting. Because I'm trying to be the middle ground for people who don't believe, who are just interested in it, like it's a Marvel comic kind of thing. I'm trying to bridge the gap from the people who are dyed in the wool and just put them in the middle and be something. I want to be like the Tonight Show for the Bigfoot people or the paranormal people. / combat field reporter with a blue jacket. I'm not all the way in there with a thermal night vision, but I know how to work them. Back at the campground, eating the hot dogs, waiting on them to come back from their expedition. But yeah, that's what I like to do. And plus, the science kind of brings me back down. And
yeah,
because I do think that there's an aspect of something weird going on with the whole phenomenon, but I also think there's an aspect of something real. By real, I mean scientifically based, going on somewhere. And so I'm just trying to find some commonalities. I've heard the people who live with them in farms in Iowa. Now it's time to hear of people that study real stuff in Winnipeg, apparently.
Yeah, well, not a lot of Bigfoots in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
So
you never know. It could just be the locals.
I'm from up north of Winnipeg here, where it gets like really rural. Like my hometown is like 400 people, right? And there is a woman up in my hometown who thinks that she's seen Bigfoot up just like in that community. And at some point, like maybe like 10 years ago, she got the attention of some sort of, I don't remember. It wasn't like Finding Bigfoot, but it was some sort of show or documentary. And they had one of these like town hall things where they like brought in some sort of out of town experts and got the town to come in and sort of get people to give their stories. And like, I missed it because I was literally in the field digging up Neanderthals in Europe at the time. And I was so disappointed that I wasn't around for that. I don't know. Nothing came out of it because I don't remember anybody filming up there, but I mean, there are people not that far from here that think that Bigfoot lives, in this area as well. Not a lot of sightings in Manitoba here, but there are some.
Yeah. I guarantee there's one anywhere in Canada. It's like the unofficial home of it. What was it? There's people close where I'm at that have sightings. I've got one. It's known locally as the Flintville Monster, and it's 18 miles that way. And I got a guy who says he saw it while he was fox hunting one time. Coming on next week, so we'll see how that goes. If not, I may be on the ground in Flintville. Yeah, the Neanderthal thing, which I have to coach myself because I have a lot of biologists, I have a lot of anthropologists. One of my favorite co-host is a biologist, and I can't say the word theory anymore
Yeah.
because of him. I start shiver every time I say theory or hear it now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so Neanderthal is, they're closely related to humans, obviously.
Hmm.
What is how long ago did they die out? I mean, didn't they just integrate into society eventually?
Well, I mean, this is the thing about paleoanthropology
Mm,
is it's such a hot field right now. Everything I learned 10 years ago has been turned upside down. Like, it changes so fast. We're making so many
mm-hmm,
findings. So they're humans. They're a separate species of human.
mm-hmm,
Very, very similar to us. It's really hard to tell, like, cognitively how different they would have been because, I mean, thoughts don't fossilize, right? So
yeah.
we're working from skeletons and trying to put together what was going on in somebody's head, right? But for, you know, for all we can tell, there's no good reason to think that they were any, less intelligent or really
Mm-hmm,
significantly different from us. Our lineage split with theirs somewhere between like 500,000 and 800,000 years ago.
mm-hmm,
Um, Going back to something like Homo erectus, right? So we share Homo erectus as a common ancestor, and then our lineages diverge. They went extinct 30,000 years ago in Europe. And so basically, they evolved starting in Spain
mm-hmm,
about almost a half a million years ago. The oldest pre-Neanderthal we have, which we actually have DNA for, which confirms that it's on the Neanderthal lineage, is 430,000 years old. And then over time, they evolved to be what we call classic Neanderthals. And then they sort of migrate west. So they migrate all across Europe and into the Middle East and then into Siberia. And then at some point, modern humans, we evolved in Africa. And then we migrated into the Middle East. And we're finding more and more evidence of migration at different times. So it seems like there's
mm-hmm.
probably like a push and pull. We would like sort of move into the area, they would move into the area. And it's pretty unclear exactly what the timeline is right now. But we do know that we did interact with them, and we know that we did interbreed with them because,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, we do have Neanderthal DNA in us. At least everybody who has ancestry outside of Africa. Because, of course, when the modern humans left Africa, that's when they interbred with the Neanderthals. And then all their descendants spread around Europe and Asia and eventually the Americas and Australia, carrying those
Mm-hmm.
Neanderthal genes. But the Neanderthals never went into Africa. So people with only African ancestry don't have very many Neanderthal genes.
That was
But
crazy. I found out my cousin had like 1% Neanderthal.
yeah,
So
well,
I was like,
one
look at
percent's
you.
low. It's 1 to 4
Yeah.
percent for people outside of Africa. So 1% would be about the low end, and 4% would be about the high end.
Huh. I didn't find any in me though. I was shocked about
Oh,
that.
well, you got to have some because
Yeah,
everybody
it's gotta be
does.
some. I'm
Yeah.
all like Balkans, Russia, Scottish, Irish, German, French. I mean, I gotta have it in there somewhere.
Well, the thing is that that interbreeding was so deep in our ancestry. Like, the first humans to leave Africa interbred with the Neanderthals, and then their descendants became everybody else in the world, right? So
Mhm,
everybody in the world outside of Africa pretty much equally has Neanderthal ancestry. But like 1 to 4% is not a lot. So like they did mix with us, but not like it wasn't a full mixture, right? It's
mhm,
still they're a pretty small contribution. And then they go extinct as we are moving west across Europe. And so basically what happens is like one way or another, we drove them to extinction. And it probably wasn't like direct combat, but it was probably more sort of competing over resources.
yeah,
We had better ways of extracting resources. They were generally hunting large animals, but we were doing
mhm,
things like fishing, and we had more ways to extract resources. And sort of over time, they just disappear westward. They disappear from Middle East, and then they disappear from Central Europe. And the last ones that we find are in Spain again, 30,000 years ago, and then they're extinct. And then we're the only ones left in Europe. But do you know that Neanderthals aren't the only humans that were alive in the world at
mhm,
that time? The crazy thing is today there's only one species of human, but 50,000 years ago, there were probably at least a half a dozen species of
mhm,
human alive on Earth at any given time, and we were only one of them. And it seems like once we started to spread around the world about 50,000 years ago, everybody else that we run into, we interbreed with them and then they go extinct. So it seems
kind
like,
of absorb them.
partly absorb and then partly
Yeah.
just drive, just drive to extinction by using up all the resources, right?
We're good at that.
Yeah.
I took a couple mini courses on it back in high school. We'd have like local experts in certain fields come in and give like a little 6-week course. And I took one on Neanderthal and quote unquote cave people.
Mm-hmm.
And like I remember stories and reading articles about how they found bone piles of eating lesser people like hominids, human like hominids, hunting them, something like that, things of that nature.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of evidence of cannibalism in the
Mhm.
fossil record, but it's difficult to interpret from, our perspective, because cannibalism is actually really common just throughout our own species, right? Pretty much every culture has some form of cannibalism. In our culture, it's pretty taboo, so it's only like, a plane crash or like
Yeah.
war like Leningrad where people are starving. So, but like there's other cultures in the world that practice cannibalism as like a grieving ritual where I can't remember which culture it is, but there's one where if an infant is stillborn or possibly if a young baby dies, the mother eats the baby. And it's because it's like painful to think of that baby being alone, right? The baby is dead and it's not going to grow up, but it's always going to be a baby. So if you bury it, it's a baby that's alone and, it's going to be, scared and stuff. So, but if you eat it, it's inside you and it becomes part of you. And so it's considered compassionate. And then there's another ritual from Papua New Guinea among, there's a very famous example among people called the Foray, where they would eat their dead by cremating them and then mixing the ashes into a soup or a drink, and then they would drink it. And it's the same kind of thing. It's you keep your ancestors inside you and they become part of you. And so when we think about cannibalism, the fossil record, with our Western perspective, we think, oh, it's war and they were attacking and eating each other. But it doesn't have to be that. It could be, something compassionate. It could be something caring instead of something violent.
Yeah, the last podcast on the left, I don't know if you listened to them or not.
Yeah.
Did you catch their Alive series last month or over
was it on the Andes plane crash, that one?
Yeah, the Alive. Yeah, the Alive.
Yeah.
And they did the whole rundown of that, all the cannibals throughout history, like eating the babies, eating the old people, and the ashes. I guess I thought I do that. I'm sure somewhere in my core memories I do that, but I didn't realize it was that extensive.
Yeah, I mean it's and lots of animals do it too. It's just not really uncommon for cannibalism not to exist in a species.
I knew animals did it. There's even like in the book Jurassic Park, there's a scene where the velociraptors are eating their babies.
It's been a long time since I read that book.
Yeah, they didn't put that in the movie.
Yeah.
They do what? Freaking bust in and eats all the raptor eggs. What the clever girl. That's another rabbit hole I go down as random Jurassic Park facts. You'll have to just excuse me.
That's all right. I like Jurassic Park. People always confuse archaeology for paleontology, but like there's a pretty good number of archaeologists that were also really into paleontology before they focused on archaeology.
So you think? So here's the deal with the reason I don't call myself a Bigfoot podcast 100% is there's no Bigfoot evidence. I don't know if you've heard or not, and you don't really get to talk about a lot other than anecdotal sightings and maybe a couple blurry squatches, But the ghost people come in hot with evidence. They have stuff, and and I have a ghost people on paranormal teams, like whole families, and they just show me all their EVPs. They got their pictures, their silhouettes they catch. And I wonder if paleontologists turn archaeologists because the paleontologists might go cold, and archaeology seems to be more common, easier to find human things, and it's still the same thrill.
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, humans have been around for humans and our ancestors have been around for 5 million years.
Yeah,
but animals, living things that fossilize have been around for hundreds of million years. So
Oh
like
yeah, of
there's
course.
way more paleontology to find than just human fossils.
Maybe easier to locate areas where they are is thinking about. I don't know.
Uh,
I'm trying to explain why you would go from paleontology to archaeology in my brain.
Well, I can tell you the way it happened for me was that, paleontology is something I was into and archaeology when I was a little kid, but like that's
Mhm.
not like a real job, right? So eventually you grow
What?
up and you're like, I can't be a paleontologist because that's not a real thing. Real people, I got to take a practical job, right?
Mhm.
So I went to university thinking I was going to do some practical job, like become a teacher. And I just started taking courses, and I took an anthropology course and, you know, just ended up falling down that path. But my university didn't have a paleontology program, but it did have an anthropology program. So it's really just a coincidence that I ended up in archaeology instead of paleontology. If I went to another school, I might have been a dinosaur paleontologist today.
Okay, anthropology is interesting as they come. I ended up a history minor by accident,
Mm-hmm.
and that's because I would go. And it's no shocking. This was the time before podcast, back in the Hinter days, in the 2005 era,
Yeah, yeah.
back in the before time. And I would take the history classes on subject. I was in the South, and so I'd take like American history, Civil War history. I would take, Roman history, European history, and it's like I went just to listen to the stories. And I have an eidetic memory, so the tests were just easy. So I just spent like hours just listening to the stories and regurgitating them for a grade. And half my college was done in like a year and a half. She's like, "You did all this history already?" I'm like, "Yeah, those classes are easy and fun." Like, "You have a minor already?" I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "What's a minor?"
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. I don't know what my major is yet. You're telling me I got a minor? That's how that went. Yeah. So anthropology, I think, is like history, like on crack. It's more interesting because it's
Mm-hmm.
like hands-on history.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, archaeology, especially, that's when I'm teaching archaeology. I say the
Mhm.
difference. Well, I mean, I say it because that's just the way it is. The difference between archaeology and history is what people wrote down, and archaeology is the garbage they left
Mhm.
behind. So
There's stuff.
you put those things together, you'd think the stuff people write down would be more accurate because they wrote it themselves. But people lie. People don't say bad things about themselves, right? So
Nope.
you take what they wrote about themselves, and then you look at their garbage and you put the two together and try and figure out the fuller picture.
Like cave paintings, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Those are always those are always a big tell-all
Mm-hmm.
about. Like I often wonder, like, the thing with the going back to the Bigfoot thing. They always bring up the cave paintings that they only painted what they saw. But at the same time, as much as I want it to be true, like maybe they just thought of that. Like a black blob in the woods sounds scary to a primitive kid with an ash stick.
Mm. Well, the cave
Mhm.
paintings are really interesting because, like, when we talk about cave paintings, we're really talking about like a pretty restricted time period and
Mhm.
geography, or like the cave paintings that probably are coming to everybody's mind are the
France.
ones from the Upper Paleolithic in France. Yeah, and they're really interesting because they're mostly animals and they're mostly pretty realistic looking, and um, it's not just what they saw because there's different details to it. There's some geometric
Mhm.
shapes, but the weird thing is they never drew humans, or almost never. And when they did draw humans, they were just like stick figures,
Mhm.
whereas the animals are really well done, right? So it's not just that they were drawing what they saw, because they would have seen a lot of humans and therefore they would have drawn humans. So there was some sort of logic going into those cave paintings, and it's
Mhm.
really, like, we don't really know what they were for. There's a lot of hypotheses, not theories, but uh
Hypotheses.
yeah. But we really don't know exactly what the meaning of the cave paintings was, because it's not just that they were drawing random things that they were seeing.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that seems like I know it's not like wouldn't be a like limited resource because they're just using dirt and ashes,
Hmm.
but at the same time, it's not like they're in studying abroad for the summer to find themselves either. It's like in between the one morsel of food they could find that day, and so the fact that they took the time to draw that cow and some of the
Hmm.
other stuff you see, and the ones the Bigfoot cave paintings I was always bring up is the one that looks like what's his name, Gossamer from Bugs Bunny, the big red thing
Oh, yeah,
that
yeah.
always that always wears the tennis shoes. Like that's one thing. people bring up with the Native Americans and the cave paintings with the Bigfoot is almost a piece of more extreme anecdotal evidence that maybe they saw something we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I always try to push it in my mind. Maybe they saw Gigantopithecus a lot right before it kicked off, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe they saw an interdimensional monkey. I don't know. I'm just saying it's very fun to toss around the idea and how the cave paintings are possibly a piece of the pie. I don't know.
But I mean, the other hand, they're like, people have always been creative, and like
Mm-hmm.
they didn't, like I said, they didn't just paint what they saw. They sometimes invented things. Like, are you familiar with this
Yeah.
this lion figurine? I think it's from Germany, from the Upper Paleolithic, where it's a lion, but it's anthropomorphic. It's standing with a human posture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course they didn't see, I mean, maybe some of your listeners will think they did see a lion man, but I mean, the general interpretation, of course, is not that they actually saw a lion standing upright like a human, but that a human mind is creative and that they can create a
Mm-hmm.
lion standing with a human posture. So just because they painted something, it doesn't mean that they literally saw it. It means that people are creative and they can combine things in their mind and put that into
Yeah.
art. Another one they have in the cave paintings, one of the very few humans that they have in the Lascaux cave, I think they call it the shaman, but it's a human stick figure, except that it has a head that seems to be like a bird head, and beside it
Mm-hmm.
is a staff with a bird on top of it. So they interpret it as a shaman because it's got some sort of staff, but it
Yeah.
also is a human with a bird head, which again is not something they saw. It's something that they sort of imagined, right?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I'm like some people. Well, I said it a while ago, but like that they only drew what they saw, but they have to be some kind of creativity. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they weren't just robots because they weren't modern humans.
Well, exactly. And like, this is a real misconception about the past, is that people in the past were somehow different from us, but like we've been humans for hundreds of thousands of years. And the
Mm-hmm.
stuff that people did in the past, the way their minds work were pretty much the same way our minds work, right? And in some of my
Imagine the
archaeology
hours.
classes, I talk about like the graffiti that we find in the ancient world. If you had a minor in history, I'm sure you've looked into the Roman graffiti, right?
Mm-hmm.
We think of graffiti as a modern thing, but like the Romans drew graffiti on everything. They love to draw penises on stuff, and so
Yes, the
in my
Pompeii.
lectures, in my lectures I have a picture of a Roman graffiti, and I put that beside a spray painted uh, penis graffiti that I took on the dumpster outside of my apartment building, and be like, people are the same as they were 2,000 years ago. We just love
Mm-hmm.
drawing penises on things.
My boss came back from Pompeii last summer and followed the penis road. I don't. You know what I'm talking about. They used to the houses of ill repute. They would
Yeah,
have like
yeah,
instead of arrows, and they had
yeah.
one turn in a corner and it went like this.
Yes.
I was like, they're the same kind of people back then.
Yeah.
Damn, there's Mr. Magoo. How'd I get
Yeah.
over here? Okay, now in a rabbit hole on my other screen. Quit looking at this stuff. Another one is the I don't know if it's pareidolia because it's not by definition, but the little golden airplanes
Oh yeah,
from
yeah.
Peru are actually just fish.
Yeah, yeah.
But because they have the fin things, like everybody sees an airplane. If you look at it, it's a fish.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Lots of stuff like that. It's you ever listen to a podcast called It's Probably Not Aliens?
No, I never would. No, no.
They basically review Ancient Aliens episodes.
I'm going to now.
If you like that kind of stuff, there's another a smaller, lesser known podcast called Digging Up Ancient Aliens, hosted by a guy named Frederick Trusaham, who's an archaeologist. That one is less fun, but way more informative because that guy does so much research. But on Digging Up on Probably Not Aliens, they have a saying where they say "thing looks like thing," which is sort of the depth of the research that the ancient aliens sort of people go into. They see a thing and they're like, that thing looks like that thing, and therefore it has to be that thing, which is just a lack of creativity on our part. Just because we think it looks like something we use today doesn't mean that the people who made it thought it looked like that.
And as bad as I love the subject of ancient aliens, and would really enjoy like a little bit of proof there. Maybe like the T-Rex eating the flying saucer meme and says, "Damn, we'll have to really screws things up." But I really get the word might be insulted when I think about when people bring that up sometimes, because we're humans and we're pretty smart, and we're made in the image of a higher power. I think in some, however you feel in that regard, I think we're
And
put
that higher
together.
power is aliens.
Yeah, it's definitely. But what I'm getting here, I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens, people. But
Yeah.
yeah, humans are pretty intuitive. I mean, we're smart. If you put something in front of us, we were designed to kill animals 50 times our size by walking it to death.
Mm-hmm,
And
yeah.
we do the same thing to a problem. We just walk
Mm-hmm.
it to death till every solution, the wrong way to make a light bulb is just out of the way, and all of a sudden you're left with the damn light bulb. And so I get insulted in Ancient Aliens as much as I am interested in it, and I think Crazy Hair is kind of cool. I can't think of his name, but I think
Sucralose.
yeah, I don't remember his name on purpose just so I can call him Crazy Hair.
Yeah.
I think it's, but yeah, I just think that humans are more fascinating than we want to believe.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, that's exactly the attitude that everyone in archaeology has towards that idea. Because, like, I also I like Bigfoot. I like conspiracy stuff. I like I loved Ancient Aliens when I first saw it. I thought it was the craziest thing. And of course, as fiction, right? It's a crazy idea. Not having any idea in 2011 that it was going to become this phenomenon and actually lead people to believe that aliens actually did anything in the human past. But the problem is when you get into these archaeological conspiracy theories, and I teach a new course at the University of Winnipeg about archaeology and popular culture, where we basically just talk about archaeology and movies and stuff like that. But we get into the pseudo-archaeology topic, and if you dig into any archaeological conspiracy, any pseudo-archaeology topic, if you dig enough, you hit racism at the bottom of it. You either hit white supremacy or anti-Semitism, and that's what you're saying. You say it's offensive, this idea that humans in the past couldn't have done something, but it's even more insidious than just being offensive, because what they're saying is that people who are typically the ancestors of non-white people for most of these things, right?
Mostly, yeah.
Yeah, and what they're saying is that the ancestors of non-white people couldn't have done the amazing things they actually did, and it's this way of diminishing the accomplishments of non-white people. So, I mean, if you want to get into that, we can dig into it. Because we say this online sometimes, and people are like, "Oh, you're being too woke," or something like that. But like, really, there's just when you follow the actual literature and you follow it back in time to see who wrote it first, it really is white supremacy at the base of it almost all the time. So these archaeological conspiracy theories, even the ones with aliens, they feel fun on the surface and they kind of suck you in, and you don't realize that what you're learning actually was originated by some white supremacist 100 years ago, and it's been passed down through a series of telephone until it gets to the History Channel,
Well, now I feel bad. Never watching that show again.
I mean, you can watch it if you want to hate watch it, right? I used to love hate watching it, but I mean, I'm an archaeologist, so I got pretty burnt out. They kind of have been saying the same thing over and over since about season 3. They don't have anything new to say.
I don't watch a lot of those things like Finding Bigfoot or Expedition Bigfoot anymore, just because the people I talk to on the subject are much more interesting.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, the Finding Bigfoot and those shows, I mean, they never find anything. So, I mean, it eventually it gets kind of boring to watch.
I always said if they were successful, it'd have been on the damn news, I would think.
Exactly, right?
We would have known before production ended.
Yeah.
If they'd have found a Bigfoot.
The thing that drives me crazy is the way they edit those shows. They always edit it to make it look like they found something, but then after the episode's over, they go to the new town. Like if you saw something there, why don't you camp out there for a few weeks and get it on camera? So
somebody said that last night.
Yeah,
why don't you stay?
Yeah. So I mean, the show is edited in such a way that they can't find Bigfoot. If they find Bigfoot, then the show is over, right? So they have to keep that suspense going throughout however many seasons they've got. Which, like for me, I used to love Finding Bigfoot, but I got bored of it after 3 or 4 seasons.
It was cool because the first episode took place in Georgia, and I think I know a couple people who were in it.
Yeah.
But after that, but if you talk to anyone that does any kind of, let's say, squatching, they'll tell you how they do it is a complete wrong way. You have to act like you're not trying to find them.
Yeah.
You have to cook bacon and you have to talk really loud and sit around the campfire and not do anything. Then they start showing up and doing rocks.
Yeah.
That's how it starts, the rocks. But that's the strategy people in the know will tell you. Like you can't just go out there and start whooping.
Yeah.
Might work a little bit, but to get them stirred up and follow you back to your camp, you have to talk loud, cook
Yeah.
spam.
I don't know if it was on an episode of your podcast or some other one, but people are speculating now. There's so many people out there looking for Sasquatch. They're probably all whooping at each other, and they think they're finding a Sasquatch.
Yep, they're just 100 yards from each other. Whoop, whoop. I think Joe Rogan actually made that joke too.
Yeah, probably
on his documentary. He's got a real good one. It's called Joe Rogan Questions Everything. It's a 6-parter from like 2010.
Yeah, I think I saw that.
I love that one. I had 2 people from that show on my show. One of the remote viewers, and that's a different world there. One guy, he said he worked with. He was one of the men that stare at goats, and he worked with one of the like the Tom Brady of remote viewers, who like described the top secret version of a Russian submarine that they said couldn't exist, and it turns out it did. He described it like a year before they found it.
Yeah, I don't have anything to say about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I can only really stick to biology.
Yeah, I can't either. I don't have any experience in any of it. I just listen to it and like, yep, this sounds amazing. But the anthropology, I almost called you a biologist. Yeah, the anthropologist is anthropology is fascinating as it goes so far back. And I was going to ask you about, have you seen the Ancient Apocalypse by Graham Hancock?
Oh boy, that's a thing in the field. Oh boy, I saw one episode and I couldn't bring myself to watch more, but I've watched a lot of the critiques of it. Of course, I hope I don't have to explain this to anybody. It's entirely bullshit, and it's easily provable bullshit. And at the foundation of it, once again, racism. Now, Graham Hancock is going to tell you he's not a racist because, I mean, people in our language conflate like a racist is a bad guy, right? And that's not really how racism works, right? We know racism is institutional and sort of the structures in society that oppress people. But at the foundation of everything Graham Hancock says, there's racism, largely because, I mean, the whole idea of, this conspiracy stuff, we go back to Ancient Aliens with Von Daniken. We go back to Atlantis. It's all racist at the core. So, I mean, he's building everything on a foundation of racism. But beyond that, even if there wasn't racism in it, you can take anything he says and very, very easily discredit it by looking at what the actual archaeologists say about it. So like I said, I didn't watch anything except the first episode, but I can tell you about that first episode because he talks about, he goes to Gunung Padang.
That was the thing on top of the mountain, isn't it?
Yeah, or according to Graham Hancock, it's a pyramid.
Yeah, the pyramid falling down.
It's not. So I can just very quickly, for anybody who's seen the episode, if you want me to just give a very quick example of how easy it is to disprove Graham Hancock. He's talking to a guy who's supposed to be an archaeologist who works at the site, who is actually like a geologist or something. But the site is a volcano. It's like a dormant or a dead volcano. And there is an archaeological site on top of it, which is made up of all these stones. And these like hexagonal basalt pillars that form in volcanoes, right? You got them
like
in
Devil's
Iceland.
Tower.
Devil's Tower, yeah. So it's basically a formation like Devil's Tower.
Yeah.
And it's got these hexagonal stones in it. And humans, the problem is it's a really cool site, and he's like tainting it by making it something that it's not. But people could be really interested in the site because it is really cool and really old. People built a structure on top of it using these basalt columns, which would break off and form these cool hexagonal bricks, which they used to build buildings on it. The problem is that he says it's like 30,000 years old or something like that, and it's just not. I can't remember how old it is, but it's, since the last ice age, 10,000 years or less, which again is still really cool. But he argues that they sort of terraformed this volcano into a pyramid. And of course, it's just a natural volcano with an archaeological site on top. But one of the geologists that they're with there, they took a sample, like a core sample into the volcano, and they dated some material that they dug out of it, and they got a date of like 30,000 years. And what they're doing is manipulating people's lack of knowledge about how dating works, right? Because dating is carbon dating, right? You take carbon and you can determine from the decay of carbon-14 based on how much carbon-14 has decayed into nitrogen-14 and how much the ratio of carbon-14 to carbon-12, how old something is. And there's a maximum range for that. If it's older than 50,000 years, there's no carbon left. So you can't actually use carbon dating for anything older than 50,000 years. But you have to have carbon in the thing that you're dating, right? So whatever you date has to be made of carbon. If you dig a hole in the ground, there's going to be stuff made of carbon in it, right? So you can dig a hole in the ground, pull out a piece of wood and date it, and it'll give you a date. But that doesn't mean people were there at that date. So they didn't date an artifact. They didn't date human bones. They dug a hole in the ground, dated something that they didn't tell us what it was, and got a date of 30,000 years. And they say, there you see, it's 30,000 years old. Well, if you dug deeper, you'd get a date of 50,000 years because it's like a jungle. There's tons of carbon in that soil, right? So this is the way they're manipulating people. They're doing tests that don't mean anything and counting on people not to understand what they're doing. So it sounds sciencey and people believe them. But I'm sorry, I should probably quit ranting about
oh no, Hancock. This is good stuff. I didn't know how I was supposed to feel about it, honestly. I thought it was interesting, like the ancient aliens. Yeah. But it just seemed way too convenient the way he just found things.
Do you know what the real insidious part is? He comes out gunning right from the beginning. He says, archaeologists are going to hate this because I'm telling you the truth and they're trying to cover up the truth. Ancient aliens is kind of more fun. It's like, archaeologists believe this, but what if it was this? But Graham Hancock, first of all, ancient aliens are a little out there and a little more difficult to believe. Graham Hancock is saying, it's not ancient aliens, it's just people. But it's different from what the mainstream archaeologists tell you, and they have a conspiracy against me, and you can trust me because I'm telling you the truth. So he's way more dangerous than ancient aliens. He's actively trying to undermine the real science that real archaeologists do to make money, essentially, because he's making money off that show, right?
Yeah, and I never got past the first episode either because it got kind of, even for someone who was trying to, maybe give him a shot, it was hard to watch and a little repetitive. I've seen him on Rogan. He was saying the same thing he always said on Rogan too. Yeah. So I'm like, I've already heard most of this. And here's the thing with his buddy Randall Carlson. He's the Great Flood guy, Younger Dryas thing.
Yeah.
He does this when people are trying to fake something. They do this thing like they have a secret and they can't tell you. And he started doing that on Rogan. I'm like, why's he doing the same thing all these other people do? Like, you're on Rogan. You've already made it past. Quit acting like that. He goes, well, that's for another time. That's going to take a lot. What's for another time? I'm like, what do you mean? You're on Joe effing Rogan? You have time. You have the time right now. Whatever you have, do it.
Yeah. I mean, you got the feel right there. He's hiding something. Yeah. And what they're hiding is the fact that they're intentionally being manipulative to cover up what their stuff is actually based on, right? Because that Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is to archaeology and paleontology basically what intelligent design is to like creationism, right? It's a rebranding of it, right? Creationism sounds like if you say you're a creationist, you sound backwards, like you don't understand the science. But if you say you believe in intelligent design, it's still creationism, but you've rebranded it to feel more scientific and therefore more palatable. And so that Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, that's a fancy sciencey word to just basically explain Atlantis. Fundamentally, what they're saying is, it's the new story of Atlantis, but dressed up, right? And so hopefully I don't have to explain that. I know that I do have to explain because I teach this in my archaeology class, and people think Atlantis was real, right? People think that there might have really been a place called Atlantis, which either we found or that we could find, but Atlantis wasn't real. It was a fictional story. Yeah. Do you not know that?
You're telling me. I know that. I don't want to know that, but I do.
Yeah. So Atlantis, it was never meant to be a real story. Plato wrote about Atlantis in his dialogues, but Plato, the way he wrote, if you've never read Plato, he writes in thought experiments. He writes in dialogues. He has his characters sort of come to knowledge about things by telling stories to each other, right? So Atlantis was like a parable for a society that was too cocky and thought they could take over the world, and then they were defeated by Athens because Athens was so good and pure, right? That's what Atlantis means. It's a parable.
And it was nuclear holocaust. You ever heard that one?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, literally everything. Do you know what I could tell you? Conspiracy theories about Neanderthals, like whatever exists in archaeology or biology, someone's come up with a conspiracy theory about it, which at the base of it is always racist.
That's the best thing. It's my favorite part of the day. That's racist.
And like again, I don't want people to be like, oh, you're just too woke. Everyone's too.
No, I understand.
But like, it really, really is. So
I've been trying to say this for years about that definition that you're trying to get out of racist. I've been trying to say that for years, and they're just like, "Well, you can't say that." I'm like, "Well, whatever. All right, I'm done."
So the Younger Dryas thing, if your listeners don't know, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is this idea that there was an asteroid impact during the Younger Dryas, which was a period at the end of the last ice age, 12,900 to 11,700, or somewhere in there. It was about 1,000 years long, right at the end of the last ice age. So at the end of the last ice age, it started to warm up and then suddenly just got really cold for about 1,000 years. And then after that, it warmed up and we get the temperatures we get for the last 10,000 years, right? But the idea of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis was that there was a huge asteroid strike on the Earth, which maybe caused that cold snap or something like that. And that there was a human society that was super advanced right before the Younger Dryas. And that asteroid destroyed them, and we lost all the evidence of that civilization, except for in these certain places where you can look and find it, like Gunung Padang or something like that. But it's really just dressed up Atlantis. And now Atlantis, the original story from Plato, was just a story. But Atlantis as a myth grew over time, and in our society has come to mean a mythical race of pure people from which essentially all the white people are descended. And the Nazis picked up on this. And so for the Nazis, this was the origin of the Aryan race. And there's other things that relate that are slightly different, but they're all fundamentally the same thing, like Hyperborea or Mu or Lemuria. These are all essentially, they're different places and they have different things, but they're all essentially the same concept, that there used to be a place where perfect, pure white people lived who were the ancestors of all the people on Earth. And that as you spread away from that central area, you sort of got farther and farther away from good and pureness. And depending on how explicitly racist your ideology is, your skin color gets darker and darker, and as you get farther and farther away and fall farther and farther from this perfect society. And so that fed into the Nazi myth of the Aryan race, who were this Hyperborean. Hyperborea is like a far north continent, a mythical far north continent where the good, pure Aryan people come from, and then spread down through Europe. And then as they get farther and farther away, that they degenerate into lesser humans. And that's what the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is. It's that ancient story, ancient, that story that's been around in our culture for hundreds of years at this point, but it's dressed up to be more science-y and therefore more palatable to modern audiences. But depending on who you read and who you dig into, it's more or less explicit that this civilization was white and that they were the ancestors of modern people, and that the closer your relationship is to this ancestral pure white population, the more good and pure you are as humans. And so, like I said, any archaeological conspiracy theory or pseudo-archaeology, if you dig into it, once you get 100 or 200 years back, you're pretty set in the middle of racism.
And all the Atlanteans are always in like white robes and glowing a little bit.
Yep.
Whenever you see them. Now, in the Randall Carlson and Grant Hancock shtick, they do talk about how humans got down to like 1,500 people. Did that happen at one point? Is that a thing?
There are times when human populations became really small. I'm not really, I don't know too much about that. I don't know where exactly we get those numbers. I think a lot of that comes from
census
genetic census data. I think it comes from genetics. I think this is looking statistically at genes, and I'm not a genetics guy, so I don't know exactly how they do it. But again, that's sort of a theoretical, hypothetical kind of thing. It's the genetics data sort of supports that, but it's hard for me to understand as an archaeologist. If the global human population got down to 1,500 people in the last 50,000 years. Like we've spread around the earth in 50,000 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Imagine 1,500 people spread across the entire planet. Like
Yeah.
you've got 100 people. You've got maybe like what 15 communities of 100 people on the entire earth. That doesn't seem plausible to me based on the archaeological evidence, because we've got archaeological records on every continent except Antarctica that are continuous, going back tens of thousands of years. And so that feels a little low, but the genetic data does, as far as I know, support a sort of genetic bottleneck where the human population size shrunk pretty dramatically compared to what it had been and what it became later. So again, there's truth in it, but I think it might be exaggerated, and the genetic data doesn't always align well with the archaeological data. One of the things about genetics is archaeologists and anthropologists, like our whole thing is context and holistic perspective, looking at everything in the broadest possible picture. Geneticists can sometimes get sort of zeroed in on the genes and kind of ignore everything else. So when our genetic data gives you a number, a lot of the time it feels like when it comes to archaeology, the geneticists can be a little overconfident in their numbers. But again, I'm not a geneticist, so I don't want to talk too much about that. And we don't have the paper in front of us, so I don't know exactly what it says, right?
And to get the peer-reviewed periodical out real quick.
Yeah.
It's like geneticists are like your archaeologists are talking to an eyewitness, and geneticists are looking at the closed circuit feed.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, well, according to this, according to the double helix.
The best thing is to combine as many lines of evidence as you can, because different lines of evidence will say different things, and you want to sort of pull the real picture out from all that huge messy data.
I've wondered that exact thing about, you said across the world. Like whenever I hear somebody say that stat, it's on Reddit a lot too. Like at one time, humans are down to 1,500, and we're all from, like, were they in one place? Because it's a big old place. There's 1,500 people in my neighborhood right now.
Right. Well, that's the thing. We weren't all in one place. We were all over the world. So if you extrapolate that, like you're looking at like what, one person spread out by like 1,000 kilometers in between them across a grid around the world.
10 people per continent.
Yeah, exactly. So it doesn't seem realistic. But like I said, I understand that the data shows that there was a pretty dramatic population decrease at some point. So probably not 1,500, but maybe a few 100,000. Again, the global human population at the time was much smaller, because like our population has been exploding like within our lifetimes. I think there's like twice as many people on Earth today as there were when we were born, or something like that, right?
Crazy too.
Yeah. So like throughout the vast majority of human prehistory, there would have been less than 1 million people, probably on the order of a few 100,000 people on Earth. So I guess, a few 100,000 people dropping down to a few thousand or a few tens of thousand is a pretty significant drop, right?
Caused the carbon footprint to go down.
Well, that happened during COVID, didn't it?
In China it did.
Yeah.
My favorite stat like that is the Genghis Khan killed so many people that it caused the core samples to show less carbon during his reign. He killed so many, like 50% of the population of the world or something?
I don't know that exactly, but one of my favorite sort of historical archaeological facts is, Mansa Musa? He was some sort of leader, some sort of king in the Mali Empire or the Songhai Empire. I think it was the Mali Empire. He I can't remember what year this was, like 1300 or 1400 or something.
1312.
1312. He made the Hajj. He made the pilgrimage to Mecca, and he was so rich that he just threw around his money the whole way from like Mali to Saudi Arabia. He threw around so much gold that he collapsed the entire economy of North Africa when he did that trip. I believe he was the richest man in the history of the earth relative to, whatever the exchange rate to Mali golds to whatever the current dollar is.
Caused a state of inflation and collapsed the whole thing.
Yeah.
I'm looking up right now. Yeah, Mali Empire. That's called the Hajj?
I think it's called the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca.
All right. I didn't know about that. I've heard that story before. I didn't know who it was. About how he just like made one area so rich that it brought it down when he left.
Yeah.
That caused a Great Depression to happen. Imagine like Dubai kind of riches. It's also very funny that you answered my Atlantis question before I got to it.
Oh yeah.
I was going to ask what you thought about. See, I don't go down this. This is kind of like causing synapses in my brain to go because I don't go down this rabbit hole a lot unless I'm just listening to a documentary on it. So it feels good. It feels like I've got some wrinkles happening here. I was going to see if you knew. Have you heard about the little bag in all the sculptures and the hieroglyphics?
Oh yeah. I think I might know what you're talking about.
The handbag that all the
like
things
the
are holding.
Sumerian stuff or something like that.
Yeah. That's it. Like they're all holding it.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that. No, that's really before my time because I do paleo stuff.
People think it's like a time travel device that they're all holding.
Well, I mean, again, it's thing looks like thing, right? You see a thing,
Yeah,
it looks like a little bag. You try to imagine what we could use. The one that I love is the one where they have those wristwatches in the Sumerian carvings, right?
Mm-hmm.
You ever see that one?
Mm-hmm. That's what was part of that as well.
Yeah, so those wristwatches, the thing that I love about them is that they wear them on both hands. If you look at these carvings, they're wearing one on each hand. So like, why would you wear a wristwatch on two hands? Like just because it's a circle with some sort of lines inside of it, that doesn't mean it's a wristwatch, right? And also, if you're a time traveler, why would you wear an analog watch? Why wouldn't you wear a digital watch? And also, why would you wear a watch? Because everything has we have a computer in our pocket now with a clock in it. I don't even wear a watch anymore, right? So like, just because a thing looks like a thing at our sort of narrow window of time, and just thinking like something from 3,000 years ago looks like something we have over a decade and thinking, it has to be the same thing because it looks kind of similar. It's really, sort of short-sighted, narrow, just kind of a narrow imagination to think that it has to be exactly the same thing, right?
Our screenshot of history that we have.
Yeah.
Did you see the new Indiana Jones just came out like last year?
Somehow I haven't yet, even though I haven't mentioned it yet, but I have a podcast where we review archaeology and paleontology movies.
Yeah, you do have that, don't you?
Yeah.
I talked to some of your buddies.
Oh yeah.
I can't remember what her name was.
Kim, yeah, she said.
She's in Manila, so it started with an M, but she's in a place that starts with an M.
Yeah, she's in Manila. That is a nightmare for our podcast scheduling. I'm in Winnipeg. She's in Manila. Ross is in Scotland. We have. I wake up at 6 o'clock to record, and she's recording at 8 in the evening in Manila.
How did that happen? Did you go to school together?
No. So Kim and I are both sort of active in the Paleoanthropological Society of Canada, which is a very small academic society, has about 50 or 60 members right now. But my thesis advisor founded it, which is why I have been roped into participating in it. And Kim was the treasurer up until recently. We had new elections for different members, but Kim was the treasurer, and I was sort of the grad student coordinator, website developer for a period there. And it was during COVID that we were sort of doing a lot more things online with the society, meeting to talk about papers and things like that. And we had both independently sort of had this idea to start a podcast. And she knew Ross previously. And so she invited him to join us as a co-host.
Yeah, time didn't exist during COVID, so I can understand it.
It does exist now. It was a lot easier to do a podcast during COVID than it is today.
Those are such fun times in certain aspects.
Yeah, as long as I never went outside or saw people face to face, it was great.
I worked the whole time. I never lived. Nothing. It's like I never got my pandemic. That's unfair, is what happened.
But anyway, I've never met those two face to face in my life, actually.
Sorry, ranting over here. So what? But let me think. Yeah, so it's why is anthropology so hard for me to say? It's an anthropological movie review podcast.
Yeah, strictly it's a podcast where we review movies about cavemen. But
that's right, cavemen.
We broaden that a little bit because there are a lot of movies about cavemen, but like a lot of them are really bad. So every so often we got to throw in something a lot better. Like we do some Indiana Jones, we've done Jurassic Park. So we'll do archaeology and paleontology, but we try to stick as closely to cavemen as we can.
So that's a very limited genre.
Yeah. It's a
Did you
very
see
niche podcast.
Did you? And we're gonna go inside baseball here, and I don't care because we got an hour, and no one listens past 20 minutes on my podcast anyway.
Oh,
So
that's every
it's just
podcast,
me and
yeah.
you. I'm sure they do. But there was a movie. It's from the 60s. It's got to be. It looks like watching Gilligan's Island. It's called Dinosaurs, I think. And
I mean, there's a lot of movies with similar names. There's one called Dinosaurus.
But they were frozen under the ocean, and lightning struck them. They drug them on the beach. Lightning struck them. There was a brontosaurus, and there was a T-Rex and a caveman. And the caveman, like I remember, he flushed the toilet and ran away and tried to fall in love with a girl. I don't know if you saw that one or not.
That doesn't sound familiar, but I would love to figure out what that is so I can add it to our list.
Look, I can edit this out. I got it in here in VHS. Yeah, it's Dinosaurus.
Oh yeah. I haven't seen it, but it is on our list.
Yeah, I knew I wasn't crazy. That's right. VHS, bitches. It's so good. It's stupid as hell. They use miniatures.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see it or not, but the caveman on the back. Oh, come on. He's like falling in love with a girl.
Oh yeah.
At one point, he flushes a commode and it scares him. I remember when I was little, I thought that was the funniest thing. What about I'm out of breath. The Encino Man and 2001.
Encino Man is our gold standard. That was our second episode, and it turns out I'd never met either of them in person, like I said, and never really talked to either of them before we started recording the podcast. And on our first episode, it was revealed that we all love Encino Man. And so we basically rank every movie on a scale of like 0 to Encino Man.
Don't eat the chicken. Tastes just like frog. This was from 1960. Yeah, Encino Man is hilarious. Some people said the biggest crime in cinema is not doing a part 2 with the Encino girl at the end.
Oh my God. There is an Encino Man 2. It's called Encino Woman.
What?
And you're lucky that you've never heard of it because it was a TV movie that played on like Sunday night Walt Disney show.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. But it doesn't pick up that story. It's a totally unrelated story where another cave woman guy, and it's I mean, it's not very good. It wasn't as bad as I was kind of worried it would be, but it's definitely not something that that you're missing. The only place I could find it though is on YouTube. Somebody obviously recorded it off the TV on VHS and then converted that to digital. So it's really low quality, but I couldn't find anywhere else to watch that. It seems to have been scrubbed from existence otherwise.
You know what else I found out was scrubbed from existence? Apparently, Hannah Montana and the Jonas Brothers are doing a 3D concert one day. And I don't remember this, but I should. They were giving away hundreds of millions of 3D glasses at Walmart for this big premiere. It was a big promotion. And people were having these parties and stuff, scheduled like Super Bowl parties with kids to come over and watch back then it would have been the big tube flat screen TVs.
Yeah.
Like the size of a school bus. And they were gathered, they had all this food, they got together, and the concert came on the TV and the 3D didn't work. It didn't transition.
Oh.
So it was like 5 minutes just blurry. And apparently Disney pulled the feed, never mentioned it again.
Oh, wow.
You can't find it anywhere.
One of the things with archaeology is like we're at this new phase right now where like people think archaeology is just the ancient past, but like archaeology, there's no theoretical lower young limit to what can be studied archaeologically, right? Mm-hmm. So there are people starting to study things archaeologically almost right up to the present. Like there's video game archaeology right now, which is really interesting. And there's people starting to think about how we're going to do archaeology in the future because so much of our culture isn't material anymore. It's digital. And so we're leaving a digital archaeological record And there's the saying that once something's on the internet, it's there forever, and like that's great if it's like your nudes or something. It's like a good lesson not to let stuff get on the internet. But in practice, stuff gets wiped from the internet all the time, and it becomes impossible to find. And we don't think about it too much because it's getting so much easier to find stuff. Like, it's so easy for us to find all these movies from the 50s and 60s about cavemen that otherwise 10 years ago I never would have known where to find them, right? But sometimes if there's some kind of piece of data or some sort of thing that happened on the internet that nobody cared about, that kind of stuff is really easy to get lost. And archaeologists are really interested in the mundane stuff, right? We're trying to reconstruct the life of the average person, which is generally mundane stuff. And so we're trying to think about ways of doing archaeology in the future where instead of digging in the ground, we are digging through digital information and trying to sort of conceptualize what's going to happen with all this information, because there's no, it's not like it falls in the ground and gets buried and it's locked in the ground. It's like data gets moved around, hard drives get wipes, servers, go down and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's not magic. It's just, it's in a place.
And so we're like, there's a lot of people starting to really think about like how to preserve this digital information for archaeologists in the future who are going to be using totally different techniques than what we do today. It's a pretty interesting thing to think about.
I thought about that, like in the future, like even after humans go away, how they're going to find our digital, like when the aliens come down and find this planet full of, Mountain Dew cans and and still running Toyota pickup trucks. How are they going to find out what we were and tap into our electronics that may still work but be off?
Yeah. Or like, you find a CD or a tape or a hard drive or something, but like it's an artifact that you can dig up, but how do you read the information on it, right? And like, will the information even preserve, even if the disk or the drive itself does preserve, right?
You started talking about that. I started looking up the, you've heard of the ET video game from Atari.
Oh yeah. I was going to ask you about that. I teach that in my course, actually.
Yeah, I was thinking, for some reason I thought it was a Yoda video game, but the ET.
Yeah,
it was so bad they buried it. What the hell? What do you teach about it? How do you teach it?
Well, I mean, I teach it as part of my archaeology and pop culture class. So I mean, it's TV, it's video games and archaeology connecting, which is cool. But it's also the reconceptualizing what archaeology is, because that happened 40 years ago, actually to this year, right? It was 1984 that happened, right? And we don't typically think of doing archaeology of stuff that only happened 40 years ago. But actually what happened was so much information was lost that we actually didn't have a great historical record of it, right? Because Atari didn't want anybody to remember what they did. It was such a massive failure that they destroyed all the records of it. And so for decades, it was basically a myth, right? It was people heard these stories about this garbage dump full of ET games, but nobody really was sure. So people had to do like the historical research where they had to track down as many documents as they could, and then literally do the archaeological research where there was the documentary about it made called Atari Game Over, I think, where they had archaeologists and they took some sort of core sampling thing, and they drilled a hole into the garbage dump and discovered, material culture artifacts from Atari. They found cartridges and stuff like that. And so that's a combination of history and archaeology, but it's for an event that happened at the time. It was in 2014. So it was only 30 years in the past. So, it shows you how fast information can be lost in our culture, and how recently we can use archaeological techniques to study like our own selves who were, even alive at the time, which is just a great way to reconceptualize archaeology. Like, we tend to think of the people in the past, like we said before, as somehow very different from us. Like the Romans were very different, but in reality, they were exactly like us. They were drawing graffiti on stuff, right? And so it's like building that bridge between the past and the present, and reminding ourselves that people in the past are exactly the same as us today. Their culture is different, and their politics is different, and their technology is different, but the way they think and the way they believe things is fundamentally exactly the same as us today.
Do you know if any of these games played, if they found them?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know that.
You got really deep with our culture, and I was like, hey, do you think the garbage games play? I'll reciprocate the deepness. Whenever I used to deer hunt a lot, and I would, harvest an animal, and I would be, cleaning it up, gutting it out, I would think about how this is the same thing that people 10,000 years ago, same animal, same way it feels. This is like, it felt like I was connected with them a little bit.
Yeah.
Had like some species, what's the word? Species closed memory, some kind of genetic memory. Genetic memory. That's what I was going for. Anyway, yeah, I was just saying it. I know how you feel about that. I bet if you can find one of those games that played, it would be worth $1 million.
E.T. Did you ever play E.T.?
No.
They buried it because it was worth nothing.
Oh, I know why they buried it. Yeah. I didn't the last podcast did one on that. It had to be where I heard about it.
Oh, maybe.
And the that documentary.
Yeah.
I don't watch news. I learn everything from like random podcasts. I'm probably the worst type of person.
No, that's everybody these days.
Because you hear people like the nightly news says this. I'm like, you watch the news? Wow. I watch the news only when there's a tornado threat. And I check one blog every morning and it has the graphic. And if there's no graphic, I don't check it. We get tornadoes like once a week in March to April and May. So you got to check it around here.
If we're talking about archaeology and conspiracy theories and stuff, I want to comment on something that one of your previous guests said. You had a guest who was he studied with Grover Krantz. He had a PhD in anthropology.
Carlos.
Yeah. One of the two totally opposite ends of the spectrum things he said. One of the things that he talked about was how he's moving away from Gigantopithecus being the ancestor of Bigfoot because and it's something that I've been saying as well for years, like evolving to be bigger is really easy. But evolving bipedalism is hard, right? So the only reason people really connect Gigantopithecus with Bigfoot is because they're about the same size.
Yeah.
But like that doesn't really matter because you can evolve to be bigger or smaller. That's a really easy thing to happen through evolution, right? Fundamentally changing your posture and realigning your toes like a foot, that's a much more complicated thing. So if the only thing really linking Gigantopithecus to Bigfoot is their size, that's not really a strong connection. Yeah. And I really love that because like I said, I've been saying that for years. If we wanted to talk about like what Bigfoot is, there's a lot of more plausible hominin or hominid extinct hominids that it could be that are probably more plausible than Gigantopithecus. But on the opposite end, he said something else that I have to comment on because it was such a throwaway line. He said the mound builders were giants and just left it at that. And I'm like, whoa, you got to tell me more about that because that is another archaeology conspiracy theory. And I can't let your listeners go away thinking that the mound builders were giants. So do you know anything about the mound builders?
I know that there's a lot of those around here.
Yeah.
Alabama, a lot of mounds.
The mound builder culture was so extensive.
I thought they were just burial mounds. I thought that's what they were.
Oh, well, I mean, they are, but they're so much more than that. The mound builder culture is so extensive that you've got them in Alabama. We are at the upper northern edge of that here in Winnipeg. So we have mounds along the river that runs through Winnipeg here is the Red River, which then goes down south along the border between North Dakota and Minnesota, starting somewhere around Fargo, North Dakota, which
South Dakota?
North Dakota.
Yeah.
Everybody knows Fargo, North Dakota, because of the show and the movie, which otherwise is an unremarkable place.
The show is so good, by the way.
Absolutely, yeah.
Chef's kiss.
Yeah, it was great. Love it because they mentioned Winnipeg a couple of times because Fargo's pretty close to Winnipeg. And the thing about being Canadian and especially being from Winnipeg is every time Winnipeg is mentioned, we got to be like, oh yeah, Winnipeg. And then like we brag about every time Winnipeg was mentioned. Like, hey, did you know Homer Simpson or did you know Matt Groening's father, Homer, was from Winnipeg? So Homer Simpson is named after a Winnipegger. Stuff like that. Anyway, I go off on tangents. So excuse me.
Oh, don't worry. You're on the right place.
So the Red River flows between Minnesota and North Dakota through Manitoba and then up to Lake Winnipeg. But the origin of that river is really close to the origin of the Mississippi River, which of course flows through Minnesota all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And what that means is if you're, from an ancient population that uses the rivers as highways, it's pretty short jaunt from the origin of the Mississippi River to the Red River. And this is why we see the mound builder culture basically along the Mississippi River and all the tributaries into the interior up to the Appalachians, and then a little bit up the Red River. So we've got just the last little extension of that mound builder culture here. But it was not a single culture. It was many nations of people over thousands of years, and they built huge cities. Do you know Cahokia?
I've heard of it.
Yeah, a lot of people haven't. It's a mound builder city outside of St. Louis along the Mississippi. It's at the fork of the Mississippi and I can't remember, the Ohio River, maybe. I can't remember what river is near St. Louis. But it's a city that was made up of over 100 mounds, and there are many different types, but the central one was essentially a pyramid. It was a big square mound with multiple steps. It was like a step pyramid, and it had structures on top, and it had like government or religious structures on top of it. And the city at the time, it reached its peak around 1300, I think, and it had tens of thousands of people, possibly up to 40,000 people at its peak, which was probably the biggest city in the world at the time. Like London, England existed as a city at that time, and it was bigger than London, England at the same time. And this is really important, I think, because when people think about the Native Americans, they don't think of them as people who build cities and had civilizations. They think of them as like nomadic hunter-gatherers on the plains, right?
That's part of your racism thing.
Exactly.
That they tried to squash the breadth of their culture by saying they were just sparsely populated when there are actually billions of them, or millions.
But, you know, it gets so much more insidious because the whole mound builder thing, the reason we have a term mound builder is because during the 1800s, as, you know, people are settling westward, right? And as they cross the Appalachians, they start settling the Midwest. They start discovering these mounds and these cities made up of mounds that were in ruins at the time, right? Cahokia reached its peak at 1300, but it had already started to collapse by 1400. And by the time European contact arrived, this civilization was already in decline. So the first explorers spread through that area, you know, in the 1500s. And of course, they leave smallpox, which spread through, you know, it spread through the entire continent before any, you know, American settlers really got there. And so by the 1800s, when people are really starting to settle west, up to 97% of the indigenous people of North America were wiped out from smallpox. So the last gasp of that civilization that was already declining, it was decimated by disease before any of the settlers got there. So by the time people start settling the Midwest and farther west, they're finding these remains of ancient cities, but no indigenous communities living in those cities. And so they started to ask, who built these cities? And in the minds of American settlers, it was just unimaginable that it could have been Native Americans who built those cities, partly just because there was just a sort of a general racism in the world at the time, right? Because, I mean, we're in the middle of, you know, the colonial period and the slave trade is going on, right? So this is just the way white people think. But also because they were actively taking that land, right? And so if they thought that somebody had lived there before and was a great civilization, it would be wrong for them to take that land. But fortunately, they were mostly dead. And there was just a small group of, you know, small communities of Native Americans left. And it was very easy to say, oh, these weren't the people who built the cities, so it's okay for us to take that land, right? And so the state of archaeology, which was really in its infancy at the time, was speculating who could have built these mounds. And they thought of, they said it could have been literally anybody, but they just couldn't imagine it could have been Native Americans. So they said it could have been the Vikings, it could have been the Mayans or the Aztecs, or it could have been the lost tribes of Israel, or it could have been literally, it could have been the Phoenicians or the Greeks. It could have been people from Atlantis. And it could have been giants. That's one of the things they said. It could have been a race of giants that lived here before the Native Americans did. And implicit in that, or not explicit in that narrative, was there was a race of advanced civilized people who built this mound builder civilization. And then the Native Americans destroyed them. And then as we moved westward, we are displacing the Native Americans, but it's okay because they weren't the first people. They actually destroyed a better civilization that was here before them. And this was used to justify the American settler expansion westward. And it was done so really explicitly. who's the guy responsible for the Trail of Tears? Andrew Jackson, right?
Yep.
In his State of the Union address, he specifically mentioned this, I think in 1832, and he was talking about this American westward expansion. And he said, there used to be a great civilization here before the native people, and we are, it's our duty to displace the native people so that we can take back this great civilization. And that logic was part of what justified the Trail of Tears, which was the forced removal of, I think, 5 tribes from the American Southeast, from like Florida and somewhere else along the Gulf there, to what they called at the time, I think, Indian Territory, which became Oklahoma. Yeah.
Trail of Tears runs just down the road here, right across the mountain from where I'm at. That's
and
right. When I go see my parents, we drive down the Trail of Tears.
Yeah, and it like thousands of people died, right? So this idea that giants were the mound builders, and it was such a throwaway comment that it probably went by most of your listeners, if they were still listening towards that was close to the end of the episode.
Honestly, that episode got listened to 89% on average, so maybe they did.
Wow. So just this idea that it's true that the mound builders were giants, it's not true, but it's worse than not true. It's literally a conspiracy theory to justify the Native American genocide, which is really something that I just, like I said, I just can't let archaeological conspiracies go uncommented on today. I
kind of like this a lot. And fun fact, they didn't teach that particular aspect of the Trail of Tears in schools here.
Oh yeah.
I didn't know that was part of it, honestly. And the county I'm from is named after Andrew Jackson. It's called Jackson County, if you didn't figure that out.
Andrew County?
Andy's County? Yeah. Got a big statue of him in the town square.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, we've got our own Canadian shame that's been sort of coming out in the last few years that a lot of people aren't aware of, but we have the United States had it as well, the residential school system, right?
Yep.
And, I think we kind of generally had a sense of it in Canada, but it's again, not something that was taught to me in school. And you're probably aware of the mass graves, or the unmarked graves that we've been finding at all these residential school sites in Canada.
I haven't heard about that.
Oh, well, for the past few years, I don't know when this started, but yeah, so the residential school system in Canada and the US, because I believe it was essentially the same, was in Canada, it was during the 60s. I don't know exactly when it was in the United States, but the government basically went through Indigenous communities and scooped up, they call it the 60s scoop in Canada. They scooped up school-age Indigenous children from the reserves, and they put them on these residential schools, which were run by mostly the Catholic Church. And so the goal of these residential schools was explicitly a cultural genocide. The goal was to, quote, kill the Indian in the child. So they were forcing these kids to live on their residential schools because the kids lived on the schools. They were forced away from their parents for 10 months of the year or something like that. And they weren't allowed to speak their Indigenous languages. They were forced to speak English. They were forced to dress in Western clothes. They weren't allowed to practice any of their culture. And they were forced to basically live as Christians. And the result of that, over 3 decades of people being scooped up, kids being scooped up and not allowed to live with their parents or their families, was broken families, right? And the kids grew up without parents, but also with emotional and sexual abuse, which was pretty rampant in these schools. And so they grew up without their parents. And then when they became parents, they had their own kids who were taken away to residential schools again. And so they didn't parent their children. And we have, generational trauma of children who grew up without parents in abusive residential schools. And this is, again, it's the institutional racism thing. Canada's government policies led to sort of the socioeconomic circumstances that, plague the reservations in Canada today. But everyone kind of had a sense of this, even though we don't really teach it in school. But what started happening was at the old sites of these residential schools, there were graveyards at these schools because kids did die at these schools that are documented, which is a crazy thing because a kid should never die at a school, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what started happening is they started doing ground penetrating radar, which is an archaeological technique for detecting disturbances in the soil. And they started finding graves that were not marked at these schools. And as they started finding them at one school, they started looking at other schools, and they started looking at more and more schools until they realized it's kind of like an epidemic of just unmarked graves at these residential schools, where apparently children were dying pretty commonly and being buried without even, notifying anybody, and just
Wow.
putting them in the ground.
I've heard of the
And
schools, just I didn't know that's what they were called.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, it's one of these things where, Canada's reputation internationally is like we're great and friendly and we're such a great place, but we have this dark secret of colonialism, just like every other country, where
Mm-hmm.
our government was actively participating in a genocide. And the last residential school in Canada closed in 1996.
Wow, that's like 10 years ago.
Yeah, I was in
in my
school in
mind.
1996, right?
I was in junior high.
Yeah, exactly. So pretty recent history, and this is why it's the intersection of archaeology and conspiracy and racism and people, when you ask people what archaeology is for, it's like, well, you find old stuff, but like, why do we care about old stuff? So much of archaeology these days, especially archaeology in North America, when we're finding indigenous stuff, it's almost like a form of activism. It's like recreating the story of people that has been destroyed by our culture, and trying to recreate these narratives of where we come from, and where everybody comes from, right?
Here's a fun one, and I didn't know I was going to bring this up tonight. I don't know if it's the same in Canada where you are, but here in the United States, particularly in the South, everyone thinks they're an Indian, Native American, and I don't. My whole life, I was told I was like 10%, 25%. Great grandmother was a Cherokee princess.
Yeah,
and we did the 23andMe, and I'm white as the driven snow. And had my grandfather not died a year before it happened, it would have killed him, because we thought it's a foregone conclusion. We all looked Indian, Native American. I keep saying Indian. But turns out we're just Italian and Russian.
Yeah.
And they're very similar, because, the Native Americans are Siberian.
Yeah.
And for the most part. So is that a thing in Canada? And do you ever study that phenomenon?
The phenomenon of people who claim to be indigenous but aren't?
I was devastated. I'm still pissed off about it, and want a do-over, because I was told my whole life, like, I identified as like quasi Native American. Like, I shot bows and deer hunted because I thought that's what I did, because it's my heritage. Now I'm like, well, damn, I'm just like Robin Hood. I'm just a white guy in the woods having a good time.
I don't think we have quite the same sort of meme as the United States has. Like that, it's like a joke on a sitcom where somebody claims to be 1/16th Cherokee or something
everybody.
like that. Yeah.
Every single fucking person, until they find out.
And you know what? I know that it's not your particular case, but I would wager that at the basis of this, because at some point somebody in your family makes that claim, and then of course it's passed on through your family, so you believe it because your family tells you it. But I would wager that, why would you want to be 1/16th Cherokee? It's probably because you're doing something racist and you want to claim, oh, I'm not racist, I'm 1/16th Cherokee. So it's
that's
actually
how it always
okay,
felt.
right?
Like, it's okay.
And exactly. And so, and again, this is the thing about how racism works. You're not racists aren't like a bad person. It's institutional. It's built in, right? So just this idea floats around that, everybody's 1/16th Cherokee, and that you can get away with saying things that you wouldn't be able to if you weren't 1/16th Cherokee. And it's not that you're a bad person, or you believe it because your family told you, and you had no reason not to believe it. But you never look into it. And even if maybe it is something that's useful, if you looked into it, maybe you lose that, right? So that's probably what it happens for a lot of people, is it's just an idea that's very comfortable, and there's no motivation to look into it, because you only stand to lose something, right?
It's insane, because my mom's side of my family, particularly my grandfather and his family, they looked it. They were dark. Like Italians were. And, they had the big lips. I got big lips, but they had high cheekbones and dark Roy Orbison hair. and you wouldn't have. And my great grandma looked like a Native American female. I don't want to say the word because apparently that's bad now, but uh, you wouldn't know any different. She had the flat face, and it was insane. I found out, I'm like, what? What? My great aunt, my grandpa's sister has a tribal card. Where'd she get it?
Well,
Nancy,
no.
you ain't a Cherokee. You are freaking Russian. You communist bastard. You German communist.
Recently we had a bit of a controversy here in Canada because there is a really famous Canadian Indigenous musician named Buffy Sainte-Marie.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody knew her as an Indigenous musician. It was like her thing, right? Like my cat's hissing at me. What are you doing, cat? Don't do that.
She's part Cherokee.
Well, everyone knew Buffy Sainte-Marie was an Indigenous musician. But there was a big controversy that came out. I hope I'm talking about the right person here. I don't want to be bad.
You're not.
There was a big controversy that came out because it was revealed that she was adopted, which wasn't it wasn't unknown. But apparently, even though she was adopted, she had still claimed that she was of Indigenous ancestry. But it turns out that she never was at all. She's just not Indigenous, and she'd been lying for her whole career. And I hope that is all correct, because I just remember that happening a year or so ago, showing up in like Twitter and people being upset about it. But like, that's the kind of thing that like it happens everywhere, right? It's having a claim to somebody's past gives you, stuff. That's what the Nazis were trying to do. They're trying to claim that they have an ancestral connection to land to justify taking that land, right? What's the guy's name? Iron Eyes Cody, the guy from the commercial, the litter commercial. Yeah. He claimed to be Indigenous his whole life, but he was just Italian. Like there are lots of reasons why people will claim to be from particularly a marginalized culture, because you get credibility for that, right?
To me, it felt like I was more outdoorsy by nature, which I kind of felt like when I went hunting. I was like, yeah, this is what we do, man. Like I told you about gutting the deer and feeling that. That was before I knew that I was white. And and being from the South, there's like this whole thing that you're from the South and you're Southern, you've always been here, and you felt like you were part of it, even though you came over on the Mayflower like everybody else. You still had that percentage that anchored you there. And I don't know, man. It's just, when I found out about it, I was like, what? None? And I look into it, and it's like there's like a whole subreddit about it, and everybody says the Cherokee Princess thing. And we had this because I'm an IT guy. We had this poor little kid come in. He's a help desk technician, and he's like, yeah, I'm part Cherokee. I'm like, no, you're not. And he's blonde-headed, looked like Hitler Youth. I called him Hitler Youth. And he said, yeah, my great grandmother. I said, are you about to say Cherokee Princess? He goes, how'd you know? I said, sit down. Patted him on the head. I made him some hot cocoa, handed it to him. Like, you're not at all. He goes, yeah, it is. My dad told me. Yeah. I pulled up my DNA results. My great grandfather was a Cherokee princess too, or grandmother. It's hilarious. I'm glad I thought of that with you here.
We're not talking too much about Bigfoot or even aliens here.
You have to cover the side stuff to get to it in the middle. I mean, we talked. We're doing the Lord's work here. And I really enjoy the scientific thought, and I don't know that I can go back to the crazy people.
Don't call them crazy people on your own podcast.
They know it's a term of endearment. They know. I'm going to go see them here in like 3 weeks in Land Between the Lakes, the home of the most famous dogman attack. So be right back in it. I don't know if you went down the dogman thing yet, but don't if you haven't.
No, see, the thing for me, because I haven't had any experiences, and I'm just an bioanthropologist, so I study primate evolution. Bigfoot is typically thought to be a primate, so this is how it intersects with me. But like dogman is like, that's just not a thing that happens. A dog is a dog and a man is a man. There's no way to biologically for that to happen. So I don't find that very interesting. There's lots of stuff that some things are plausible and some things are not plausible biologically. And, I'm pretty far to only interested in the stuff that's, I consider pretty remotely plausible.
I don't know if you have tactical bros in Canada, but the dog man in the cryptid world is like the tactical bro cryptid. It's like you're too cool for the slow, Congolian mountain gorilla that we haven't found in the Pacific Northwest. No, you got to go with the dog man, like the 14-foot, looks like a German Shepherd. Sometimes they have on Kevlar. Like that's what those kind of guys, the guys that like shave their head, bald skin fade, and like have tattoos. They're the guys you see. International Dogman Association. They have Jeeps. Always drinking beer and coffee. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Nope. Yep.
But it's always a certain type of person that's the dogman aficionado. And there's exceptions to the rule. There's people I know who are not, but like if you post a dogman encounter to a Bigfoot group, everybody's like, "Oh, cool! Like emoji, care, oh, cool stuff." You post a Bigfoot encounter to a dogman group, you get declined and banned. Get that monkey shit out of here. That's what they say. Racism. But yeah, there's that. The man, I was going to say something else, but the thing that separates those crazy cryptids from everything else is the woo factor, and that's what separates the scientific people like yourself from going way down in it, because you can't help but get in it once you get in just a little bit.
Yeah.
And anybody can play around with a lost primate that may be in the caves, but you get 1 degree into it, you start the camera manipulation, the zapping, the smell of the skunk. That's the wild part. And they all say the same thing, which really freaks you out a little bit. So you got to like keep like 1 foot on it, like over here. Like, we'll be there in a second. But then last night I had a guy talking about polar bear hair with the medulla doesn't have the polar bear hair is clear at the end.
Oh yeah, okay.
He bought this guy's moderately famous in that little community there. He bought like 1,000 foot of fiber optic cable and a bear hide, and he's going to make a Bigfoot suit out of this bear hide, but with the fiber optic cable sticking out.
Okay.
See if he can mimic like the cloaking. I don't know how far. Have you been down the rabbit hole of the cloaking yet?
You know what? Like I said, for me, if it can't be studied scientifically, it's just not interesting to me, right?
Okay.
So like,
so say the cloaking. Some people say they see the predator sometimes in the experiences, and he's going to see if he can mimic that with polar bear technology using fiber optic clear.
Okay, I mean the army is working on like cloaking technology, and like it exists, but like I don't think you're going to do it with fiber optic and a bear hide.
See, I work with fiber optics every day because I'm a network guy, but I was like, how are you going to? First, I'm thinking, how are you going to cut it? Because that stuff will just shatter if you cut it. I'll play along. I'll follow along from the house, as they say. Those of you watching at home, maybe you're a clear Bigfoot suit. Yeah, but until like there's several little places that are mimic Skinwalker Ranch. They call it like touches of it, and one of them's near here. They say is like an area, and I got invited. I'm going to see if I can have some kind of experience. I really want to, but at the same time, when the closer you get to it in person, you're just like, hold up, calm down. Don't get too excited about it. You don't want to, because when you're sitting at home talking to people, not like yourself, but like people that have experiences, you're like, oh, that's cool. I can't wait to do that. You get in the woods, you're like, these are just the woods. the same woods I grew up in. So until I see something, I'm a cautious skeptic, maybe 10% believer just for the fun of it, but I don't know.
You know, at my department, like people know that I'm the guy that's into Bigfoot. So like every once in a while, somebody writes into the anthropology department asking about something. Like they've got something, right? Either they've got an archaeological artifact or they've got some bones they want you to identify. And every once in a while, someone's into Bigfoot and they send us a message. And normally that would get thrown out, but now they get funneled to me, right?
It's not the worst thing in the world.
No, it's pretty great. But I was talking to this one guy a few years ago who thought he had evidence of Bigfoot, and he was pretty science-minded guy. So he was doing his best in his initial email to us to like obfuscate that he's talking about Bigfoot, but he's using all the keywords, right? Like like a relict hominid or
Yeah.
something like that, right? And I'm
Using
like,
the big words.
yeah, I'm like, it sounds like you're talking about Bigfoot. Are you talking about Bigfoot, right? And so he thought he had evidence at a few sites, sort of in Manitoba and Northern Ontario, that were pretty remote. And he was really trying to get me to come out in the bush with him. And it's like a fly-in place. Like you got to take a plane and you got to
Mm-hmm.
hike there. And I'm like the reality is almost any biologist or anthropologist, bioanthropologist, or even archaeologist, if there was something that we could study for Bigfoot, probably everyone would jump on it, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's a new thing that no one's ever studied. If there was evidence that we could actually analyze, I can't imagine anybody would not take that up if their
Mm-hmm.
field is remotely related to it, right? The problem is that you can't get funding for it because there
Yep.
is, like you said, there's no evidence right now. The only evidence is footprints. And footprints, I mean, I'm sure you're aware of all the stuff they do with the footprints. They've analyzed them to death, but
Mm-hmm.
it's still not
Can only do so
enough.
much with the footprint.
Yeah. But like if you had any kind of biological remains that, didn't show up, like if you had DNA that didn't actually show up as an other known animal, anybody would jump on that. But because there is no evidence, you would never get funding for this, because the way scientific research works is you have to apply for funding from these funding bodies,
Yep.
and it's competitive. And so like I have funding for my PhD research from a government grant from a national foundation that funds science research, because I put in a proposal that was long and heavily researched, and I said exactly what I was going to do, and I said what my outcomes were going to be, and I said what my contribution to society was going to be. And I think about half of the one that I applied for, about half of the people don't get accepted. So uh there's no funding body you could apply to
Mm-hmm.
and say, I'm going to find Bigfoot and get funding to cover that. Like nobody would ever, it's just a bad investment from, just like from a money perspective. Right.
Yeah.
And so like I had to explain to this guy, like, even if you did have evidence for Bigfoot, I can't get funding to do anything about this until you bring it to me, basically. And like, no, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to fly in a propeller plane with you way up north in the bush and camp with a stranger that emailed me,
Mm-hmm.
for several days to look at. What he had was a pile of clamshells that were like cracked open and eaten, and like sort of up on the shore away from the lake, which is like, that's pretty cool. Something was eating clams, collecting them and dropping them in the same spot. And I'm like, but like a crow could probably do that, right? I don't know enough about what crows do. And
Mm-hmm.
so like
Maybe.
I don't know, but like maybe a Bigfoot was eating clams and dropping his shells in a pile on a rock there, and that would be pretty cool. But like that's not enough to get funding. I can't afford to fly up north with you and camp for a few days. I can't afford to take a few days off of my actual research to go camp in the bush looking for Bigfoot with you.
Get
And
lost in
like
the barrens.
and like I also told him, because he was like, I was talking to him for a while, and he was an old guy and he didn't have a lot of family, and I'm like, I don't think that you should be spending your money to fly up north either. I think, sometimes people just want someone to listen to them, right? And this guy, I'm sure he'd emailed all the universities in town, and I'm sure he was really excited to talk to me, right? So I'm like, I don't think this is a good way to spend your money, man. Like maybe it is a Bigfoot, but like,
Mm-hmm.
Research isn't life. So I mean, unless this is a really important personal project for you, sometimes we just don't know things in science,
I think that's most of the reason that it doesn't go much further than the anecdotal that we have is because you have to use Amazon.com research equipment. And
Mhm.
that's all anybody has. And I'm surprised some Elon Musk hadn't popped up and thrown a couple mil toward it. But
I mean, that's what it would take, right? Because
yeah,
sometimes research is funded by like just rich people who like it. Did you hear about these human fossils that were sent into space last fall?
I did not.
This is unrelated again,
Wait,
but
I think I did. But do tell.
so there's this team excavating in South Africa where they found a new species of human in 2015 called Homo naledi. And it was really
Mhm.
crazy because it's very different. It's very primitive looking, but it was a very late surviving human. From what the fossils look like, they expected they would be about 2 million years old. But when they dated them, they were actually only about 200,000 years old, which is at the same time that we were alive in Africa. So this was a separate species of human that was very different from us, that we were possibly living alongside in South Africa. Very, very cool stuff. But a lot of the way they're doing their research is very different from the way we've traditionally done it in paleoanthropology. Traditionally, you hoard your finds and you keep them secret until you publish them so that nobody else can scoop it out from underneath you and beat you to the research, right? Which is good and bad. Like, I don't like that. I mean, we're, science is moving towards, especially paleoanthropology, moving towards a lot more sharing. We post our files online these days. We allow a lot more access. We've got a lot, digital scans of fossils. So it used to be really hard to access the real material, but you can send a CT scan, across the ocean these days. So we're becoming a lot more open. These people excavating Homo naledi are just being totally open. They're live streaming their stuff. They're posting on social media all the time. They're putting out preprints, which is, publishing your article before it goes through peer review, which again is good and bad, because peer review, of course, means somebody's reviewed it and they've sort of signed off as somebody else working in the same field to make sure it's credible. But if you put out a preprint, the whole community gets to criticize it before you publish it, right? So that's a good thing. But also, you can put out a preprint that's garbage, right? And everyone will tell you it's garbage, but then it doesn't matter because it's already out there, right? So even if you never actually do the review and put it through peer review and get it published in a peer review journal, the preprint is still out there for everyone to read, and so you can get bad information out to a wider audience if you put out preprints. So again, good and bad, right? One of the things they did was they sent 2 of their fossils into space on, I think, SpaceX in like September, and obviously, it was a huge publicity stunt. One of these fossils was from Homo naledi, and another one was from an older species called Australopithecus sediba. But the reason you got me thinking about this is because a lot of their research is funded by just a billionaire who's just really into human evolution research. And so that's part of why they get so much attention. They've got so much money. And then they use that money to drum up even more attention by doing crazy publicity stunts. So yeah, if there was a billionaire who just wanted to throw money at finding Bigfoot, you could actually put together a real research team. And I bet you'd get good, real scientists who aren't, the fringe sort of kooky scientists.
Or just a dude. It's always just a dude.
Yeah. And if you threw money at it, you could do the research. But as it stands, because there is no evidence, you can't get research from the real research bodies. So a lot of people complain that no scientists are taking the problem seriously, but it's that I can't get money to do that. And I can't afford to just spend all my time in the bush because I have to do my own job, right?
I bring that up all the time. Like, everybody talks about the research. I'm like, well, universities are not going to spend money for it because either they think they're a quack and there's no research. My biologist co-host has access to electron microscope down in Texas, and he always tries to get these people that have hair to send it to him because, like, I'd like to get it. They always say this. They always say, I'd like to get it analyzed, but I don't have anybody to do it. And he'll be like, hey, I got it. And like, nah, I don't really want to send it in the mail. Motherfucker.
Yeah.
Do you have it or not?
That's the thing with a lot of the hair samples and stuff is it's really convenient if you can tell the story that nobody wants to analyze it. But I mean, like I said, I'm not aware of any hair that has been DNA genotyped that hasn't given, something that is either contamination or a known sort of at least partial match to something that's known. And again, people don't really understand how genetics works, right? So it's really easy to spin a partial match to a partial unknown, right? So it's an unknown Cercopithecus, which is an old world monkey, right? Or an unknown catarrhine, which could be just, a human or, contamination that's like close to a human or something like that, right? Are you aware of the Melba Ketchum Bigfoot DNA paper? The
I know who she
Sasquatch
is.
Genome Project. Yeah.
Yeah.
That
Painfully
paper
aware of
is
that.
so long, and I've read the entire thing, and I don't understand, because I'm not a geneticist. I don't understand all of it, but I do understand it enough to know just like the things they say are so wildly improbable that it doesn't make any sense. Like, but again, nobody like the average person doesn't understand DNA at all, so they can't pick up on those things, right?
I had one of her best friends on here.
Oh yeah,
Robin. I can't think of her last name now. Haynes now. Yeah, she's a member of that project and the Olympic project. Olympic was Amy Bew. And then Melba Ketchum was. Then there's the other lady that's a dog man person. I get them mixed up, but I digress. It really hurts me.
One of the things with that genome paper is that they got what did they say the results were? There was Bigfoot was a hybrid of an unknown hominid and human women. And that's because every sample that they got a match for an unknown hominid had modern human mitochondrial DNA. And so they said it was a hybrid because the only way to get modern human mitochondrial DNA, if there was a mother or a grandmother in that lineage that was a human, right? So they can't say it's an unknown if they have modern human mitochondrial DNA. And so you could interpret that as a hybrid of an unknown ape and a modern human woman. But the problem was the modern human mitochondrial DNA was from many diverse haplogroups. And so the way mitochondrial DNA works is your mitochondria have separate DNA from your nuclear DNA. And your nuclear DNA, you reproduce sexually, so you get half of it from your mother and half from your father. But your mitochondria reproduce clonally, asexually inside your cells. And you get yours from your mother from the egg cell. So your mitochondrial DNA is identical to your mother's, and hers is identical to her mother's. And we can use this to track maternal lineages.
Mm-hmm.
But mutations will randomly occur. So if a mutation happens in a woman, she passes that on to her children and they pass it on to their children. So if we look at mitochondrial DNA and we can find specific mutations in it, everybody who shares that mutation shares a grandmother at some point. And so we call that a haplogroup. It's a strand of mitochondrial DNA defined by a certain mutation. And we identify all these modern human haplogroups around the world with A, B, C, D, E, F, G, etc., right? And we sort of map them geographically. So like haplogroup L, M, N are in Africa. Haplogroup A, B, C, D, and X are found in East Asia and the Americas, right? For example, so we can use these for tracking genetic relatedness. In all their samples that they said were from hybrids, they had modern human mitochondrial DNA from diverse haplogroups, like from European, Asian, African, North American haplogroups. And so the only way for this hybrid population to make sense is if they had like literally at least a dozen women of diverse ancestries reproducing with an unknown Bigfoot, an unknown hominid in North America to create a population. And like, it doesn't make any sense. And it would have had to have happened recently because we didn't have women of all those haplogroups in North America until, the last 200 or 300 years, right? So
like 1880.
So the takeaway from the paper is Bigfoot exists and it's a hybrid of an unknown hominid and a human. But the nuts and bolts of it is if Bigfoot's a hybrid, it is a large group of multiracial women interbreeding with a large group of hominids that already existed somehow in North America in the last 200 years. So now you've created two problems, because not only do you have Bigfoot, which is the hybrid, which we can't find, but you also have a previous unknown hominid that it is evolved from, it is hybridized from, which also still has to be found. So you've taken the Bigfoot problem and claimed to have solved it, but actually created two separate Bigfoots that both are not identified yet.
You're moving the problem around.
Yeah. And so that's only one problem with that huge paper that I, with my knowledge of genetics, was able to find. But other people who are more familiar with genetics have pointed out exactly why it was contamination that gave them those results, right? So
that sounds like the most obvious answer to me, from that rudimentary explanation.
And, just plausibly, if you find hair samples in the woods, they're not all going to be the thing you're looking for, right? You'd expect there to be some raccoons or rabbits or other stuff mixed into that sample. You're not going to take a sample of whatever it was, dozens or hundreds of hairs that they had in that sample, and they all come back as Bigfoot. I mean, that's a pretty clear sign that you're dealing with human contamination. Like even in our Neanderthal research, where we excavate in caves, we do, like you said, environmental DNA. We take soil samples for DNA, and I don't do that DNA personally. We send it to another lab that we collaborate with, but I know that their method is, if they find a ton of human DNA, the first thing they're going to do is compare it to us who are doing the excavating, because the most likely thing is that we shed our DNA into the excavation as we were digging it up, right?
A bunch of dirty people shedding your DNA everywhere.
Well, I mean, we're in the field, so
bunch of dirty scientists looking like Jack Horner out there.
That's what happens when you're out in the field and you're sharing somebody's house in the village, and there's 20 of you living in a house with one toilet.
I can only imagine. You're a braver man than me going all those. What's the farthest you've been away to do an expedition or study?
I actually hate traveling. I've been to Canada and the United States, and I dig in Serbia. So that's the only place I've only done archaeology in Canada and Serbia. But I've worked at a lot of sites in Serbia. So the most well-known one, which none of these are very famous sites, but there's a couple of caves called Mala Balanica and Velika Balanica, Balanica. And the largest amount of material we found is, or the largest amount of old material we've found is from these caves. And we're finding Neanderthal teeth in these caves that are about 300,000 years old, which is the oldest Neanderthals in that region so far, which is pretty cool.
That's close to where I come from. So I'm from I got a lot of Balkans in me. So you go a little. I had to look up exactly where it was, because you don't hear about Serbia a lot.
No, you
so
don't.
I was like, where is that? I knew it's over there in that little quadrant. You go a little bit to the right, you go over there in the vampire territory.
Oh yeah, famously, vampire is possibly the only Serbian loan word in the English language. The word vampire comes from Serbian.
What's it? Vampire?
Yeah.
Vampire. Well, would you believe it's been 2 hours?
Yeah, it's crazy. And, I mean, we didn't talk that much about Bigfoot, but it's been a lot of fun.
No, that was the whole point. That was you have to have building blocks, man. You gotta.
Well, that's true. I mean, that's the problem when you're like, as an archaeologist, you meet people out in the world and they want to know stuff, and you're like, well, I would love to tell you about this, but I really have to tell you about 5 other things before you can understand that one properly, right?
You can't start at the finish line.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like I'm in IT, and I was like, well, what'd you do to fix it? I'm like, you wouldn't understand if I told you. Why in the world would you ask me that? You just came in here with that problem. Of course you don't know what I'm going to do. Your monitor's off. Turn it on.
I just started learning coding for my stats for my thesis. I'm using a language called R. Do you know that one?
I don't do that kind of stuff.
It's a data science language, but like, just the kind of brain you need for that kind of like computer problems. I love dealing with bones, but like, it's a whole different thing to think about how to do computers and numbers and stuff.
I'm very good at troubleshooting, and I love AV stuff. So I'm a film student, but and I like doing this podcast. I got like a mad scientist thing going on here. You can't see it. I mean, I just produced this fucking thing, so I ought to tell you what's going on back here.
Yep.
But as far as that's I mean, I think I could do it because I've got a college degree, and I obviously can study and figure things out. But I don't want to do it. I don't want to code or be an admin, or I do the command line every day, and it hurts me. I want a graphic.
Yeah.
I want a picture to click on.
Yep.
I want to play Mario Paint. That's what I want to do all day. All right, Josh, how can they find you if you have a place to find, if you want to be found, your podcast?
I'm easy to find as a person because nobody else in the world has the name Joshua Lindal. I think there was one guy from Tennessee who's died in the 1920s or something. But if just Google my name. If for some reason you want to find me, I'm not very active on social media, but you should find my podcast. Screens of the Stone Age, where we review movies about prehistoric people. We talked about a few in this episode. So like mostly caveman stuff. Sometimes we do dinosaurs. Sometimes we do historic archaeology or classical archaeology. And I've got co-hosts on there who are better scientists than me. Kim Plump is a bioarchaeologist, and she studies health and nutrition in the archaeological record. Ross Barnett is actually a paleogeneticist. He studies the genetics of like saber-toothed cats, which is really cool. So if you're interested in watching mostly bad movies and learning about the scientific background that probably inspired the filmmakers, which is a lot of what we talk about, a little bit of debunking what's going on in the movies, pointing out the flaws. But I mean, that's less fun than talking about the broader scientific stuff that probably informed the movie. Check that out wherever you find podcasts. Pretty easy to find. Screens of the Stone Age. And
I think I subscribed on iTunes.
Oh, great. That's awesome. We have a contest going on right now to win some Screens of the Stone Age t-shirts. If you can find a mistake that we didn't find, or find a mistake that we made in our show. So we are pretty kind of sticklers about what you got to do to win. It's a little bit of a difficult challenge. You got to listen to a few episodes. But that's still ongoing. Probably going to go on for a while because I don't have a lot of listeners. So, I mean, I can keep sending people t-shirts for months if we just get a trickle of responses to that over time. So if it's not a draw, if you send me an email with a mistake, I will send you a t-shirt.
Okay. So it's just like first mistake, any mistake, any breadcrumb.
Yep. Until I run out of t-shirts or until I decide to stop making t-shirts.
I'm just going to watch your Encino Man one and just pick it apart. That's all I'm going to do. All right, man. Thanks for coming on. I'm going to reach out to Kim and Ross too. They seem cool. Kim seemed cool chatting with her.
Thanks for having me. If you get a hold of Ross, ask him about the paper he published commenting on the Sykes paper about the Bigfoot DNA that turned out to be a polar bear.
Yep. That's it. I think I've actually heard of that one.
Mm-hmm.
All right, man. I'll let you get back to the Great White North, and so you don't freeze to death up there with your Tim Hortons.
Oh, don't worry. Climate change. It's been the warmest year ever. The snow melted in the middle of February. That's never happened before.
I keep my truck running all day just for you people. So you're welcome.
Peace
out, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks.
It's not the last time we're going to be on here. So
great.
Brace
Hit
yourself.
me up anytime.
All right. See ya.
Okay.
I never didn't believe in Bigfoot. I never believed in it, I didn't believe in it. I never gave it any thought.
They kept wood knocking back and forth to each other, and it was in a pattern.
Barn owls don't typically throw rocks.
I come across these tracks.
Sasquatch is still not on my mind.